This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, everyone. I just want to remind you that our webinar is being recorded today. This allows us to give you access to all of our past webinars, which are available on the ZAA website, zaa.org. So welcome everyone who's joining us today. This is our professional development webinar series. My name is Jadina, and I am a member of the Professional Development Committee. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, ZAA, the Zoological Association of America, is a nonprofit, membership-based accrediting organization dedicated to responsible wildlife management, conservation, and education. ZAA upholds the highest level of professional standards in animal welfare, safety, and ethics. So every Wednesday, we host a seminar at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. This month, June, is our Animal Welfare Month, and we have some awesome webinars coming up. On 6/8 will be Nutrition and Health as pertains to animal welfare. 6/15 is Physical Environment and Behavior. 6/22, Psychological Well-Being, End of Life, and Critical Care. And 6/29, Welfare Summary and Roundtable. So just a few reminders today. The audience will remain muted throughout the entirety of the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A session. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see the Q&A icon. Please submit any questions you may have. And if you see a question that you like, click the thumbs up button, and that will push the question to the top of the list for response. So today's webinar is entitled Nutrition and Health as They Pertain to Animal Welfare. Our presenters today are Dr. Kelly George, who is an associate professor at The Ohio State University and the co-director of the CFAES Center for Human-Animal Interactions, Research and Education. She has created an animal welfare training program and provides consulting services for organizations as they develop animal welfare programs, And our next presenter is Allison Malkowski. Sorry if I didn't say that right. Allison is the assistant director of the Dakota Zoo, and she has a passion for zoos and animal welfare since her college days at North Dakota State University, where she began her zookeeping career at the Red River Zoo in Fargo, North Dakota. She has been the assistant director at the Dakota Zoo for 4 years now and finds fulfillment in advancing the care and welfare of not only the animals, but staff as well. All right, Dr. George and Allison, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry, and I want to apologize now because you will probably hear noises in the background. I have some guinea pigs in the background that are very noisy, so you might hear them as we're presenting. So I apologize if that's distracting, but hopefully it will not be. So I had the pleasure to address the group last week, and this week I have the pleasure to work with another committee member, Allison Malkowski, and I will say that, again, this has been a true team effort. So even though Allison and I are the ones presenting this section, and I think actually the two of us and Sam will be presenting next week and so forth, you know, we wanted to have a variety of speakers, number one, so that you could have the option to ask questions to different people, but also to really demonstrate that this has been a very productive committee, and that it has been a very productive team, and that this has been something that our committee really wants to focus on, is really trying to help explore the area of animal welfare and really to be there as a support service for our ZAA members. So that's kind of the little intro. So Allison, do you want to take this one? So.
Yeah, definitely. So hello to everyone. If you have never met me before, part of the Animal Welfare Committee, and like Kelly said, we're excited to just offer all of these different resources for people as we continue on the journey of learning about animal welfare. So just to kind of recap, if you weren't at last week's webinar, we'll just keep reflecting this on all of our presentations this month. But ZAA's definition of animal welfare is that ZAA defines animal welfare as how an individual or group of animals lives within its provided environment. Welfare is measured by using a collection of scientific evidence through continual assessments of indicators that account for an animal's physiological and psychological needs. So we're just going to keep bringing that one up for each of these series, just as a reminder to everybody of kind of what we're looking at. So.
Yeah, and the reason why we kind of highlighted that last sentence there is just that, that's kind of what we're starting to get into today, is starting to talk about a bit of the nitty-gritty of this definition and thinking about, what do we mean when we say measured by using a collection of scientific evidence, right? What is a part of a continual assessment process? What are those indicators that make sense? Now, with saying that, I do want to remind everybody that we discussed last week the elements of a successful program, but by no stretch are we here to endorse or promote or support any particular tool or any particular program. What we're trying to do with this webinar series is, again, provide information that we hope is helpful to our members, but also provide opportunity for professional growth, and also opportunity to again ask questions and have an honest and open conversation about animal welfare. So that's kind of our goal, and that's why we put together the key elements that we talked about last week. And of course, one of those being again the thinking about assessments, thinking about identifying opportunities for animal welfare. And specifically, we want to do this all based in this, based in science, right? We can't just do this on gut feel anymore. We need to make sure that, that we explore the science that underpins the assessment tools and underpins the indicators that we are trying to focus on in order for us to better, again, understand the experience of the animal, right? So remember, it's not us. We are certainly a part of their environment and a part of their lives, and something that affects their welfare. But when we're talking about animal welfare, the measurement is how the animal is experiencing it. That's why, as Allison said, we'll keep bringing up the definition. And so what we did was, again, last week, introduce to you, the 5 domains model, which is by Miller and colleagues. And I think it was even shared the last week, the actual journal article that this figure is from. But basically what we are trying to demonstrate here is that, through animal welfare science, we have been able to identify these different domains that basically these 4 physical and functional domains, which offer us opportunity to think about kind of the sensory inputs that come from these domains, which are then processed in that final domain, right, in the mental domain. And so when we think about those sensory inputs from those external environments, which we are one of those external environments, or the care that we offer, or in this case, the nutrition that we're going to talk about tonight in domain 1, those are all things that will be perceived, will be sensory inputs that are then perceived by the animal and experienced by the animal, right? So that's why we talk about the fact that this all leads into this mental domain, which is those experience in that mental domain that ultimately are the welfare state of the animal. Now, I will say that, again, just to reiterate what we talked about a little bit last week with the 5 domains model, and why the committee chose to kind of hone in on this particular model. There are other models to think about, scientific models to think about animal welfare, but we really feel that this model is a very comprehensive model. It's a very holistic model. It offers us opportunity to note, to move beyond negatives and to think about, the improvement or the opportunities for positive experiences. And that it's being increasingly recognized, not just within the zoo community, but certainly through society. Right? When we think about companionship or contentment or, all these experiences that an animal can have, this model, I would argue, offers us opportunity to look at that. And again, this is a model. So what we're presenting in this webinar series is based on this model, but there are other models that we could be looking at as well. So what we're going to start with tonight then is to start to go through these actual domains. And we're going to start with nutrition, which is domain 1. And so with that, we're going to talk about first the aspects of an animal welfare process. That is domain 1. What does that look like in your animal welfare process? Well, when we're thinking about the aspects of nutrition, basically the two things that we think about are quality and quantity, right? We're looking at things to have species, we're looking at us to provide a species appropriate nutrition, provide water that is, of course, clean and is free from any type of bacteria or any other kind of issue that could result in a health issue, which is what we'll talk about soon. But this is just an idea or a demonstration of how us that provide husbandry and management can have an effect on welfare. Basically, everything in the animal's environment, right, has an effect on their welfare. It's how they experience their life. So therefore, it must have an effect. So when we think about nutrition, we start there with domain 1, because if we think about the fact that food and water are something that every animal, including the human animal, must have. So we need to think about this from the aspects of quality and quantity. Allison, do you want to?
Yeah. The other thing too, I was going to note for this domain and for all of them, it kind of ties back into something Kelly and Susie said in the first one as well, is just a reminder that we're thinking of everything in 24/7. It's very easy for us to, be at our job for a certain amount of time or in a certain exhibit for a certain amount of time, but these animals are there 24/7, 365. So just kind of keep bringing that up as we go through kind of each of these domains. But like Kelly said, onto the metrics of nutrition, we kind of broke down the metrics for each of these into this what, when, where, how. So you'll see that theme kind of play along with all of the domains that we go through. So when it comes to nutrition, the what we're looking at is obviously what are the diet components, what types of grains, feeds are we feeding, browse versus hay versus, whatever forage that we're using, produce, formula. We have to think of all those things. And just like welfare, obviously is catered to the individual. That means we need to consider species specific components as well. So making sure that we're providing the correct diet components and considering, what's up to date with nutrition standards and everything else. The when, there's lots of different components to nutrition, more than just we go into the exhibit and we feed our animal and it repeats day after day, year after year. So it's important to consider time of day. Do we have any automated systems or around the clock feeds or just keeper fed or timed feeders, night keepers, whatever else, as well as variation in timing. Are we feeding at the exact same time every day? Is there any way to have variation in that? When can we provide it? Animals aren't always eating at the same time every day, day in and day out in the wild. And so we reflect back to that. For where, location and habitat, on or off exhibit, holding, up high, down low, around the corner, anything like that. And then how as well. There's lots of different ways that we can be kind of measuring how we're presenting diets, the temperature we're presenting diets in, shredded versus whole, hand fed, box fed, in a certain bowl, puzzle feeder, hay nets. There's all this variety apart from just an animal gets a diet. So we're looking at all of these different aspects. There could be more here than what we have listed. These are just some things to consider, not all required, but something we should consider when we're looking at each of those components of nutrition and, what we're providing for our animals.
Yeah, and I think just as a kind of a broad statement to think about metrics, as Allison said, we're going to kind of leave this framework of the aspects, the metrics, and then the goals and outcomes. So when we're thinking about metrics, we're thinking about assessment indicators. These are the types of questions that should be represented on your tool, right? Whatever that tool is. Even if it's a tool that you have created, if it is answering the right types of metrics and providing the right type of assessment in order for us to better understand the experience of the animal. So that's what we're trying to offer you when we're talking about metrics, right? So these are the areas that we should be considering. And as Allison said, there could be more than what we have just listed under what, when, where, and how. But these are the types of questions or the types of indicators that you should be using when you're thinking about how you assess how your animal is experiencing nutrition. Okay, so I hope that makes sense, and it's not just again in this domain, but we'll use this same type of metrics and as Alice said, the same types of questions. So just think about that. If you can think about, your who, what, or not who, but what, when, where, and how, you're at least on a good starting point, right? And with that, you have to also be thinking about what are your goals. Okay, so if we're going to start to think about the aspects of nutrition and think about those metrics and the types of questions that we would be asking, that means we probably have some kind of goal to achieve. Right. So what are our goals? And these should be things that you should be thinking about when you're establishing a successful program. Right. Some of the key elements is that you have a definite mission statement for welfare, but then you also have goals in each of these areas. So if we think about that, so a goal for nutrition could be that you have appropriate diet, and maybe that you have that diet with choice. As in, maybe it's not always the same diet. Maybe it's just not always a biscuit, right? Or it's not always just chow, but there is some choice in the matter of what they consume. And so thinking about getting the animal to have more choice in their nutrition. Variation again in delivering in time and even the mode or the way that it's presented. Think about that, the assortments of presentation, the way that you could maybe even potentially, include this in some type of guest experience, depending on the species, obviously, and depending on the type of nutrition that you have available to feed. So think about these different ways that animals can be engaged in nutrition and think about setting some goals for your facility. What are the actual outcomes that we're hoping for? Right. When we think about domain 1 in nutrition, we should be looking for some specific welfare outcomes. And in this case, what we would think about is that we have well hydrated, satiated, therefore thinking about things like appropriate body condition. We can think about appropriate body condition as being a way that we could kind of quantify, if you will, that the animal is satiated and well hydrated. If the animal is eating but not gaining weight or not having a decent body condition score, that could be an indicator of something else, right? So we need to think about what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. The outcomes here is that the animal is well hydrated and satiated and therefore has appropriate body condition score. We can also think about adaptability to a variety of nutritional experiences. And actually, I'm going to throw this back over to Allison because she had a great example of this that I think might be appropriate, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I definitely think when it comes to I think the key word here is adaptable. And it can definitely pertain to all of the domains probably, but especially in nutrition. Do we have animals that are adaptable to nutrition and different experiences within that? When we've talked about those metrics and the timing and the mode, we've had at our facility a couple of keepers working through some, I guess, desensitization with our raptors who had always been fed the same meat diet the same way, pretty much the same time most of their life. And when we started incorporating more enrichment into their diet and variety and feeders and, wrapping it in a bag, making them shred, tear to obtain their diet, often, it was something the keepers threw out because the animals didn't do anything with it. And we kept talking about how sometimes animals haven't had the opportunities to learn how to utilize those things. So we kept pushing it, kept trying it, a couple times a week would just try offering diet in a bag or in a carton or in a box. And I mean, it took several months actually for the animals to feel comfortable to explore and actually figure out and have the drive to figure out how to get their diet in that way. And we've seen a turnaround. And so it's not, it's just they never had those opportunities. They never experienced diet fed any other way than one type of way. And we have physically seen, scientifically can say that we have seen these animals adapt and change to be better at experiencing their environment in this nutritional way and learning how to eat more appropriately to how they would be in the wild and how important that is for their welfare.
Yeah, and sometimes I think that's a great example of sometimes you feel like you're going backwards to go forwards,
yes.
Right? But I think that those things are necessary in order to ultimately, move the benchmark, right? Move the metrics as we go forward in thinking about, welfare being on this continuum, right? We always have the opportunity to move forward, and if we're not moving forward, we're basically moving backwards. But sometimes it does take a step back in order for you to move 3 steps forward. Yeah. And I think that's a great example of what Allison was able to do. And ultimately, the animals then have a better experience, right? And that's our goal. So
right. I did want to add to the outcomes when you were talking, we talk about the well-hydrated, appropriate body condition. And then I think within that umbrella is a nutritionally healthy animal. Mm-hmm. We didn't write that specifically out there, but, which ties into health, which we'll be talking about, but animals that aren't lacking in a nutritional components. You could have an animal with a good body condition score that has metabolic bone disease because they're not getting enough calcium. So other things to consider that would fall into those direct outcomes that we're not lacking, nutrition components for a diet or a certain species. But yeah, I think the goals kind of wrap up and tie into all of those metric components into this is really the goals we're looking for. And then the components, the metrics break that down.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, we should probably have added that. I know we talked about it, but we didn't get it onto the slide. So yeah. Okay, so that gives us at least some thoughts about domain 1 and nutrition. And so what we want to do now is move on to domain 3. So we are skipping over the environment. I realize that, but we're going to think about domain 3 because when we think about, I guess I will say, for me, maybe the most objectively measured or maybe even obvious are probably domain 1 and 3, right? These are ways we've certainly come leaps and bounds in nutrition and in health and veterinary care. And so I think that these are kind of the easier ones to start with. So that's why we're choosing to go this pattern. So 1 and 3. So number 3 being health, right? And so when we think about the aspects of health, what are the aspects of health, right? Well, we're talking about disease and injury, physical fitness, and even sensory ability. Right. So when, again, what do we mean when we say health? These are the different types of aspects that we're thinking about. And that'll lead us to our lovely metrics, right? And I don't know, Allison, do you want to do it or?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, sure. Go for it.
Chime in wherever you want. So once again, we're kind of going through the what, when, where, and how, and we kind of broke it down that way. And like Kelly said, it's pretty easy, a little bit easier to measure stuff that has, we literally do tests and exams and run a lot of different metrics within health. So that kind of helps this category. But once again, this is, not all required, not all, there might be more than or less on this slide. So just consider that. But for the what, we're looking at, no signs of injury or disease, no abnormal conditions. That's not to say that an animal with an abnormal condition doesn't have good welfare, but it's something, that's really a part of that consideration and where they're at on that continuum. The when we're kind of looking at is routine health checkups. Do we have preventative things in place? Do we have routine medications? Kind of the time clock of medical care for an animal, which also ties into seasonal or 24-hour, around the clock, around the year measurements for when healthcare is being provided. So considering how an animal's health may look in the winter versus a hot summer, during the middle of the day versus the middle of the night, during the season where we need to prep an animal with a certain medication before they go outside versus when they're indoors for the winter and they may not need it anymore. So there's all the different components of the when, for an animal, and also throughout its lifetime, what it may need based on health. We're also looking at where. So we kind of talked about movement, body location. We talked about kinesthetics and how it could be where on the physical animal, where location on the body, but also how they're moving, how they're sensing their environment. Are we keying in on all of the animal's senses and making sure that we're paying attention to those throughout an animal's lifetime? As well as we talked about physical location of healthcare and examinations. Are we pertaining to health in appropriate locations for certain species, for certain animals? For instance, primates, and making sure that we're controlling disease, levels and cross-contamination type things, or, treating penguins in an area where we need good air quality. So we talked about kind of the location of where healthcare may take place versus exhibit, clinic, stuff like that. And then we're also looking at the how. So, we talked about how medical care, we have CBCs, we have chem panels, we've got cortisol tests. We can do a lot of those biometrics, the body condition scoring again. But we also want to make sure that we have good relationships with our veterinarians. We're following recommended health guidelines. This is an ever-evolving field with a lot of really unique animals. And so we need to continue to stay on with program research, make sure we're providing the best health, as things evolve too, and that we're having that good relationship with our vet and moving forward constantly in the realm of health.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, great. And then again, that will lead us to thinking about our goals. So obviously our goal is a disease-free animals, age appropriate and species specific locomotion and fitness. And again, we recognize that our animals are in our care, for their lifetime. And so, we need to think about our juveniles very differently from, our geriatrics, right? So we need to think about something that is age appropriate as well. We can think about goals having good physical appearance. That is that their skin, fur, feathers, whatever it is that might be on their body is in good health as well. And that they are, again, having routine and relevant health care, right? So if it is an animal that needs some type of medication, that we're providing that, we're doing a routine check with them. These are all the goals that we should have when we think about this domain of health. And then what does that offer us, right? What are our outcomes in this particular domain? Well, if we think about this, that gives us age appropriate vitality, right? Again, age appropriate, meaning that we don't expect, our 17-year-old tiger to act the same way as a 7-month-old tiger, but we have age appropriate vitality. We do expect that in a good health condition, that the animal has at least some level of vitality, right? That they also have comfort of good health. So think about that for a moment. When you or when the animal, is in a healthy state, it is in a positive state. It is comfortable in its health, and it is then, of course, that bleeds into the idea of vigor and so forth. And then also having high functional capacity, right? So we want the animal to always be at its best, right? And so we need to make sure that that we are assessing that the animal is achieving the health that it needs, and anything that we can do to improve that health, we need to make sure that we're doing that. And so this is kind of the goals and outcomes that we put these on one slide because obviously they kind of go hand in glove, right? So those are basically the components of the animal welfare process as we think about domains 1 and 3. Now, once again, I want to remind you that those domains, as well as the other physical functional domains, all ultimately come into the experience of the animal, all ultimately are experienced by the animal, and they're experienced by that animal through thirst, hunger, anxiety, fear, pain, distress, all of those ways that they are taking those sensory inputs and are experiencing that. So we have to, again, recognize that health, health is experienced. It's not just, a checkbox as we might like to have it be, but that we actually are trying to give optimal experience, optimal positive experience for our animals. And so what we're going to do next week is, because we're pretty much out of time today, what we're going to do next week is pick back up on the domains. And we're going to start then with domain 2, talking about the physical environment and thinking about some of the physical and atmospheric challenges. Allison had brought up the fact that on the where, right, when we're thinking about the where of health, we have to think about cross-contamination, shared air, shared water, shared space, those types of things. So, again, all of these domains do intertwine to a degree, but so we will probably bring those kinds of aspects back up again. But next week, we're going to talk about physical environment as well as behavioral interactions, and that includes the behavioral interactions with the behavior that as they interact with the environment, as they interact with their keeper trainers, as they interact with their guests. There's lots of different interactions that the animals have throughout their daily routine. And so we're going to talk about what that means as far as assessing the welfare process. So that's coming up next week, but right now I think we are at the point where we need to open up for questions about today's talk, or about maybe what we talked about last week, or whatever you're comfortable to ask. I think we're ready. Thank you for your time.
All right, if anyone has any questions, if they'll type it in our Q&A at the bottom of the screen, we'll get those questions to Dr. Kelly and Allison.
And while we're waiting for people to type in, again, we hope this series is helpful. I mean, many of you, are well versed in welfare, and we hope that this is just helping you to kind of rethink the way that you are approaching welfare, maybe thinking about ways that you can, again, always kind of push for improvement, right? Continuous improvement is what we always try to do in everything, every aspect. So hopefully these are just some opportunities for you to think about that. And certainly, even if you're not there yet, maybe you're at the kind of beginning stages. So hopefully this is giving you at least some base knowledge to move forward. So I know any
While
questions?
we're waiting for questions, do you have a recommended frequency? Is this something keepers do informally daily? Is it something formally done every 6 months? What kind of recommendations are there?
You know what, Christy, that is an amazing question. That is excellent. I would argue that welfare is every day 24/7. I mean, that should literally be part of your everything that you do should be trying to achieve those goals and those outcomes, right? And trying to understand how the animal is experiencing it. Again, not just that I provide good care, therefore they have good welfare, but that I am actually assessing it from the animal's experience. As far as a formalized assessment, typically we would see that if the animal is, in a good state of welfare, we would think about that at least on a biannual basis, is the kind of standard, just so that we are always, no one falls through the cracks, right? We're assessing every animal to make sure that we are, again, trying to be optimize the welfare for each of the animals that they're, and that all the experiences are moving in the positive direction, right? We're always looking for opportunities. As I said, I think last week, people like to use the word concerns or challenges or whatever when they're thinking about welfare. And I think even if it's that, what does that mean? That means you have an opportunity to improve it. But we have an opportunity to improve even when things are going right, so I think twice a year is kind of the minimum. But if you have an animal in particular that you need to maybe pay more attention to, or the animal is acclimating to your facility, or it's going through a transport, or whatever the case is, that might require you to think again about including additional assessments for that particular case. So
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing, a life event or something that might be happening to the animals. And maybe that's something, as a staff or a team or an individual, you guys decide what is, priority for upcoming assessments. What we maybe have standard ones that are proactive, but what might we need to be reactive to? We have an animal that lost an enclosure mate or is coming or is leaving. And that's important things to definitely identify and then try to follow through with as well. I was also going to say too, nothing's ever perfect ever. And so if go through this series and you're seeing all these different components, where we want to spark the conversation, we want to have the discussion, we want people to learn about welfare, but it's just one step at a time. And once again, it's a continuum, and we always want to aim towards those goals. It's good to have those goals in mind and realize that not all of our animals are living in a perfect condition right now with everything being hit perfectly, and that's okay. But it's important that we're taking the time to look at it, we're recognizing it, and then hopefully moving forward to a positive goal and outcome.
Yeah. So see, it was an amazing
when
question.
You're doing when you're doing the more formal assessment, semi-annual assessment, is this something that it would be the keeper would go do the assessment, or do you have a small team that goes out and would look at it?
So I would say that this is probably going to be facility dependent, because again, we're not here to dictate exactly how these the program is developed within the facility. For just in general, I would typically suggest that it be more than just the keeper, and certainly just the keeper that knows that animal, because what is the animal, what happens, right, is then you end up with a bit of subjectivity, because that person is going to be saying, well, yep, animal's great, yep, animal's great, yep, animal's great, and so I think you lose a little bit of the objectivity of that assessment. So I usually would suggest that you have at least a team of 2 to 3, one person that is familiar with the animal, but certainly think about bringing in somebody that maybe is not familiar with the animal, because they're probably going to ask questions that maybe you've thought about, but maybe you haven't thought about because you're just not looking at it from that perspective. Allison, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. The good part, and maybe some people consider it the bad part of this whole process, is that you need to really develop it towards your facility, your staff, what you are able to do. It's no good taking a huge program from some other big zoo. From our experience, we're a smaller staff, so we have a program that I feel best fits our staff, our zoo. And definitely what Kelly said, if you can get more perspectives, it's going to have a better outcome, I think, as well. Just different viewpoints, different knowledge base. Some people, especially as a keeper, and back when I was a keeper, when you're with the animal every day, you don't notice gradual changes as much as someone who's in the area not as often and might catch something different because they're not there all the time. So definitely what Kelly said, try to incorporate a couple of people for sure in the assessments if you can.
Yeah, and so I just as a kind of a tag along, and it might actually be a good segue for what I think just popped up in Q&A, is that, we had talked about last week, we talked about the fact that one of the goals of our committee is to create a resource bank, right? Now, the reason why that's so time consuming is because number one, we want to vet everything that we're putting in there. But it's not a one size fits all, right? You will have lots of different types of assessment tools. I know somebody's asking for an ethogram. It depends on species for an ethogram. There's there's not just like the silver bullet that everybody, if you just do this, everything is golden, right? And so we'll create this resource bank, which could have some ethograms in it, depending on, again, the species that we're looking at, looking for particular behaviors. But even within an ethogram, I would kind of throw out there just as a thought of, what's your goal of the ethogram? What are you trying to assess by doing a behavioral assessment? Are you seeking information for a particular behavior? Because if you're just doing a standard ethogram, like every behavior that this particular species could exhibit, that may be a little overwhelming and very time consuming, and probably even more so on the other side, not just recording it, but trying to analyze that. Right. So I'm just throwing that out there. I'm sorry, I don't know why, what the why you would ask for the ethogram. Ethograms are fantastic, don't get me wrong, okay? So having a starting point for that. But all of that is to say that even in our resource bank, please note that as we put things up there, again, it's going to be very facility dependent. What we're going to try to provide for you are examples so that you can think about, okay, these are the types of metrics that they're looking at. These are the types of indicators they're using as a part of those metrics, right? These are the goals that they're trying to achieve. So we'll kind of have those things in there, but again, we don't want to dictate that you must use this tool, because that's not appropriate. Number one, because it's not taking into account then the specificity that the facility needs. Yeah. So I hope that.
I was going to take on to the you talking about the ethogram question that popped up. I do think that does tie, not necessarily ethogram specific, but it brings up the topic of what you and Susie referenced on the last one about having a baseline and kind of knowing your animals, and also knowing natural histories about the species that you're working with is going to be really important for your staff to really know their animals in that way, the baseline of the individuals, of the species, knowing about the species. We were talking about food presentation and frequency and all that stuff. And I think when Kelly and I were working on the PowerPoint, we were talking about giraffe, and, knowing that giraffes feed 70% of their time in the wild is going to dictate how is the best to feed them in human care. So, are we providing opportunities for them to eat around the clock 70% of their day? Or are they getting all of it in a lump sum once? I think kind of to tie into the ethogram question, just knowing your animals, knowing a baseline of how they spend their time, doing a little bit of research into that, so that you know how you can improve from there. And then knowing the natural history of the species is going to be important, and is a good starting place for a lot of, especially the frontline staff.
All right. Last few minutes, if anyone has any questions, if you want to get those in, we'll ask them real fast. Christy, did you have anything else?
Well, a lot of this seems pretty easy to adapt to individuals, and you've got multiple individuals in an exhibit, and you can look at each one. What about if you've got a large troop of monkeys, or you've got, you know, a big herd of hoofstock? It's not necessarily individuals. Is there any insight to working with that?
Yeah, so when we think about populations then, because you know we have that in our aquatic species and as you said in large hoofstock herds and so forth, I would argue that primates we probably should be doing at the individual level, even with a large troop, because just because you know why. I don't even have to tell you that. But I would say, and you know, fair enough, speciesism, I understand, but it is what it is, right? And so when we're thinking about animals that we need to do at a population level, we do that typically by doing basically sampling of that population. So the goal is though that you still have eyes on every animal, right? That you are still but doing the actual assessment might be with a scan or a sample of that population. You know, if you have 200 budgies in a space, you're not going to go in and look at every bird. And I get that the time that would take is probably not something that most facilities have. And so we do have to rely, unfortunately, on taking a sample of the population. But I hope that that doesn't mean that, you know, you're not at least getting eyes on every animal to make sure that we are, if nothing else, being reactive in a proper way if we see any kind of injury, disease, you know, anything that's happening. Allison, do you want to jump on that at all?
No, I think you hit it right on the head. Nothing to add.
Yeah.
Okay, ladies. Well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions, so we are going to end our time today. Thank you guys very much for joining us. And don't forget that this webinar will be available on our website, zaa.org. Bye, guys.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.
Bye, thanks.
Thank you, everyone.